Hello.
Good afternoon, everybody. How is everybody?
Yeah, very good.
To see some friends and some friendly faces again. This is the last session of the week. So I'm delighted that this is going to be with Iomart. For the ones who were in an earlier session with me today, we heard Iomart mentioned already, so very nice that we're in the session together. As earlier on, this session's all about discussions, all about exchanges, all about sort of really opening up on what's going on in your world. Bit of housekeeping, cameras on please if possible, mute yourselves to avoid any dogs barking, phones going off and stuff like that, but don't forget to unmute yourselves. But really important, if you can get your cameras on, to keep them on, so that's really helpful for our moderator when he's sort of going through the questions and trying to facilitate the discussions. Today's topic is digital and data center transformation in a pandemic. So again, looking forward to these discussions. Our host for the session is Paul Davey. He's the Enterprise Business Development Manager for Iomart. Before I pass on to Paul, it'd be good if we could just do a little round table, so everyone can introduce themselves. If I start with Tracy, because you don't have your camera on. There you go.
I'm Tracy Costello. I'm the Group CIO for Greencore. Greencore is a food manufacturer in the UK, doing own label brands for retailers and food service.
Brilliant, thank you, Tracy. Richard Newell. Richard Newell, you're on mute. No, Newell. There's another. Sorry. But he's on mute. Okay, Richard Miller.
Hi, Richard Miller, Bank of America. I'm the Compliance and Operational Risk Director for EMEA.
Brilliant, thank you. Alex.
Hi everybody, Alex Tenney, Director of Innovation Transformation at London South Bank University.
Fabulous, thank you, Alex. Richard Newell, try again, you're on mute. Okay, Gareth, I think you're on the phone. Gareth will come back on video when he's finished his phone call. I saw he was on it. Andrew, quick intro.
Hi there, I'm Andrew Thompson. I work for Iomart, one of the business development managers here. Just wanted to assist with Paul and just listen to some of the questions, help with any answers.
Brilliant, thank you. So Paul, I'm going to hand over to you. When people do join on, because we'll have a couple of late stragglers joining on, please don't sort of hesitate to ask them to introduce themselves. I'm going to turn my camera off. So when I come back on, there'll be like 3 or 4 minutes left to go.
Excellent, thank you. That's really good. And good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for joining. Mid-afternoon on a Friday. Hope it's not the graveyard shift. So what we want to do really is make this an interactive session. I'm going to give a brief introduction of who I am, what we do here at Iomart, and I'm going to talk about some of the challenges that we've all faced on a personal and a business level to do with the pandemic, and how that has sort of impacted the data center and digital transformation, particularly in a pandemic. And I'll be keen to get your thoughts. It's an interactive session. It's not me talking at you, it's us talking amongst ourselves, just to understand other people's experiences and learn from it. So a bit about me, as Craig said, Paul Davey, Enterprise Business Development Manager. So I work at Iomart. Iomart, just very briefly, are a cloud-centric company. We're a managed services provider providing private cloud in our data centers, in our customers' data centers. We also provide hybrid cloud, which is a combination of private cloud in one of our 13 UK DCs, and maybe hybrid with a bit of Office 365, and multi-cloud, which is a combination of private cloud, co-location for legacy, AWS, Azure, Google, etc. We basically look at the workloads and the applications and understand which cloud is the best fit. We also do DR as a service, backup as a service, data protection. We've got our own security operations center, and we do digital data center transformation. Anyway, that's enough on that. So just to set the scene, so this session is really going to focus on how businesses have adapted their IT operations and transformation roadmaps. But since the pandemic started in March, we've all really had to adapt to an ever-evolving situation on a personal and a business level. And what I mean by that is, many of us are used to traveling into a city like London, Manchester, Birmingham, and being there 5 days a week. And then we've suddenly gone to working at home overnight, and we've had to then balance those home responsibilities and work responsibilities. Some of us have got kids in the house, some of us got dogs, and then there's knocks on the doors with Amazon arriving. And then we still had to continue working with then remote teams, whereas you'd normally have to be with them in the office. And then we've had those that have been furloughed, where some organisations just really can't maintain the cash flow, so they've got to allow people to go on leave for some time. But throughout that, we've had to maintain a really positive perspective to our employees and the customers we serve. But amongst all of this is we've got to plan for uncertainty. So lots of organisations have just battened down the hatches in terms of their IT strategy and said, actually, we're not going to do anything because we've got to make sure we've got the cash flow, we've got to stay in business, and let's just see what happens after the pandemic, and put the brakes on their IT strategy. Then you've got the others that are maybe e-commerce based, and there's been a massive growth opportunity for them because we're all now buying online. We were doing online buying it anyway before the pandemic, but even more so with shops closed. So that's really caused some challenge in terms of the spikes of IT and how we're going to serve those customers. So Iomart provide those services on demand to support. And we've done that for organisations such as the Royal Horticultural Society. I mean, we've all heard of the Chelsea Flower Show. Well, most people just, you turn up and sniff the flowers, look at the garden displays. Well, that all went remote this year. So Iomart were providing IT infrastructure to deal with the online guests. But we've also seen, I was at another CIO event a number of weeks ago, and we done an online survey. 30% of CIOs that attended had invoked their DR and business continuity plans for the first time. And some have had to make tactical decisions to plug the gaps, to get them out of a hole because they wasn't expecting a pandemic. Their DR and BC plan wasn't necessarily aligned to a pandemic situation. We've then had to see things coming in like collaboration tools, for instance, Zoom, what we're in today, or Microsoft Teams. Others have had to buy new equipment to deal with those peaks in demand if they don't have a private cloud. Then you've got the remote desktops, things like virtual desktop infrastructure. Then you've got the unified comms to support Teams and Zoom. But a lot of organisations are also thinking about, well, actually, post-pandemic, do I need to resize my portfolio in terms of buildings and realign my budgets to deal with the long-term uncertainty? Now, I was talking to the global head of business continuity at one of the big insurance companies. They got 15,000 people within 72 hours of declaring an invocation working at home. Traditionally, as a business, everyone would have come into the office. But now 15,000 people are working at home. And that's not just in the London insurance market, but that's in Manila, Hong Kong, Singapore, India, where traditionally those people would never be allowed to work at home. And they're now looking at it and saying, well, actually, post-pandemic, do I need a multi-million-pound building in the city? And do I need my IT hosted in my building when I can free that capital up or get rid of some legacy leases? So one of the things that organisations are doing is taking those short-term IT fixes, and they've got to think about how they turn that into longer IT strategy. They've got to update their BC and their DRR plans because you've changed your production. Well, have you made sure your DR and BC plans are aligned to production? How are we going to continue to do remote working? And then, of course, we've got to think about Brexit. Are there any compliance and regulatory concerns that we need to think about on the 1st of January, as well as realigning our IT strategy? So for a lot of people, a lot of things are on hold. But just before I hand over to you guys, just some interesting things that I've come across talking to a couple of CIOs over the last couple of days. Someone I spoke to said that Teams utilisation had gone up 3,000% within a couple of days of the pandemic striking. And the Teams chats, hundreds of thousands of chats per week, because you can't just tap someone on the shoulder in the office anymore. So that's impacting the human interaction, because we're now seeing each other on the screen, but it's also actually changing the IT strategy of where people need to be in the next 3, 6, 12, 24, 36 months. And I don't necessarily think there is going to be this gold rush of everyone selling property, because that's going to have massive impacts on people's pension funds, for instance. So that's just really setting the scene of how things have changed since the pandemic's come in. So I'm going to open it up, and I'll get those that just joined while I was talking to introduce themselves. But the question is, and this is open to everybody, because you don't want to hear my voice for the next hour, is how, as an organisation, have you adapted your IT operation and your transformation roadmap in light of the mass move to remote working? Who wants to, before we do, hold that thought, but who's just, John, I think you've just joined the line, if you'd be kind enough to do a quick introduction.
Yeah, so John Smith, so former CIO for Royal London Legacy, life and pensions insurance organisation. Ironically, what you've said there in terms of the challenge of rapidly moving to home-based working, ironic that we were in the preparations to move into our new building this year, 2 or 3 miles up the road. The old building was designed to accommodate about 1,500 people. The new building designed to accommodate about 2,000. And we were already looking at the back end of 2019 at a peak overload in that building of about 2,400, meaning that we were already having to move to some level of home working just to accommodate local colleagues. Yeah, I think the whole pandemic has shifted mentality. It's created new questions about the building, the configuration of that building, and therefore other buildings that are in use across the portfolio, as you say, in Edinburgh, in central London, and Bath and other areas as well. So yeah, it goes on and it will go on forever.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because that's what I'm hearing from so many different organisations. Anyone else would like to pick up on that point that John just made?
So hi, Christelle Kelly-Delebach. I'm CWT's Global Head of Privacy. CWT being in the travel industry, a leader business travel management company. So the pandemic has definitely impacted CWT as other travel industry players, and the response has been really pretty much across every single area of the business. So you're talking the workforce, you're talking the teams, the reporting lines, geography, the product portfolio, the tech, integration, how we are going to focus on the core, what's the next core strategy to adapt to a much smaller, in many ways, environment. So yeah, I mean, I think that, and we've done pretty well. I mean, considering we're still here, so that's certainly a testimony. And also, adapting to the new risks from a cyber threat and various other risks. So there's a lot. There's a lot to say, but yeah, it's a radical transformation and impact in terms of on the business, on the travel industry.
No, you're absolutely right, Christelle, and it's interesting that you pick up on the security element of it, because security has always been a concern, and we've seen, to tie it in with the travel industry, Travelex, the people that deliver the money I think they had a ransomware attack, and it effectively put them out of business. And security has changed even more so with people bringing their own devices and logging on from home, as I'm logged on now with my iMac, which I wouldn't have done in the office. So how secure is that? So I'd like to, and I'm not necessarily picking on people here, but I'd like to get other people's views. And so I'll be asking each and every one of you just for your input as well. And in no particular order, Alex, I can see you there online. I'd be intrigued to get your views.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Just for those that have just joined, I'm Alex Tilly, I'm Director of Innovation Transformation at London South Bank University. So for us, I think it's two sides really. So we were always trying to strive to deliver the technology to the student, regardless of location and what have you. So we already had an element of it in flight in terms of kind of hybrid learning, but not to the degree that it is now. It's difficult because before the pandemic, we decided to embark on a large estate investment fund to kind of modernise the physical premises in central London, which meant closing some of our largest teaching spaces and modernising those as much as it was the technology that was going into them. So we, at the beginning of the pandemic, as I said, we'd always had a means of being able to have remote delivery, but we'd never accounted for the entire university overnight working remotely, which is, so we've got around 18,000 students and 2,500 staff. So it meant that we had to significantly upscale our virtualization. So we had a large software and application estate to be able to deliver means of VDI where possible, and that wasn't possible in all of the applications. You imagine with nursing, engineering, and others, there's a large amount of software that was quite niche, very costly and hefty in terms of performance as well. In addition to that, we had to, in some ways, reassess some of our security layers. So we had to upscale our VPN connections to allow people to remotely dial into connection from bring your own device, so bring your own device accelerated. And in some ways, we also had to allow an element of remote desktop as well into some of the niche workstations that are located in laboratories and what have you. So for us, it accelerated what we already had. But now for us, as you'll be aware in the press and from the recent government announcements, that universities have reopened, and we had a reasonable September intake given the current climate, and students actually reappeared on campus, and we do have academic staff that are fully back in the office as such. For the likes of myself, we're not student facing as much as others, so we are, if not required, we are going in sometimes, depending on what the latest announcement is from Boris Johnson. But nonetheless, we are very much open and business as usual where possible. We're just having to utilise our estate a little bit more efficiently than we had before. But the other side is, with the investment we've made on the estate, and actually, the university needs to continue, and it needs a campus. And there's only, yes, technology is an enabler, and it allows you to do an element of communication and collaboration. But there's also things that can't be replicated by technology in terms of face-to-face interactions. So we need to give students the reason to actually come to campus as well. And that, I don't, in terms of the approach we had with the estate reinvestment, it's naturally changed significantly in terms of being able to cope for a hybrid academic model. So having a split classroom, so you'd have physical students in the classroom as well as those dialing in remotely, but regardless of location, that your education experience wasn't being disrupted by the change in approach. And I think we're in that journey together. I don't really know I know where we are now, and we're all kind of working together as a collaborative to try and understand where the future lies. And I guess that's from a student focus. From an infrastructure side, absolutely, we've been focusing the kind of big things: business continuity, disaster recovery, and ensuring that systems are stable, reliant, and that we aren't necessarily, as I say, reliant on the physical campus in terms of being able to provide, I suppose, the technologies that we need to deliver as much as we had before. So it's a double-edged sword, really. Yeah, you want to bring the technology to the student, but you also don't want him to go, oh, well, what's the point in going in? Why am I paying my fees? I can just get a student YouTube, plug my headphones in, and, I don't actually physically need to go there. And it's difficult and challenging when you're in central London. One area that we have said is, that we have still had students in halls of residence. And despite actually being on campus, then connectivity has been a really big issue for us as well. Reliability, and I know probably everyone on the call, me getting really disgruntled with my home broadband performance and certain providers. You know, you can do the best tech in the world. There's some things that are out of our control, but it's a gradual learning process, I'd say.
That's really good to hear your feedback, and I'm going to come to Gareth Tracy and in a moment, and Richard, if I may, from a Bank of America. So we've seen masses of students on London South Bank University, but from a Bank of America perspective, you've had to deal with it in the UK and across the pond as well, and many other geographies. So keen to get your take on it.
Yeah, it's been one of the challenges. It started in APAC, swept through Europe, then hit America, and there's been different levels at different times. So from a sort of, I don't know, strategy, almost location strategy perspective, and working from home stance, we've had to change it based region by region, location by location. But but we've had to keep flexible so that there are a group of front office, you know, traders that can really only trade from their workstations in our main trading floor in the middle of London, you know, next to St. Paul's. And they've just had to continue coming in. They've had to get taxis into the office and such like. And there's had to be technology staff there to support those applications. And I always joke, there's as many people in technologies now sat on the trading floor as there are traders, because it's not so much done by people, you know, over phones and throwing the phones and shouting at each other. It's not done like that. It's done by direct market access. It's done by technology and through, you know, pipes and systems these days. So we've had to, you know, retain the on-prem capabilities, but then also, you know, 95% of the staff have had to move to a work from home stance. And the good thing is, a lot of where we did, I mean, we had a, you know, dedicated wide area recovery sites, and we had a certain number of desks set up for mostly for the front office traders, actually. And we did send a team of traders down to one of our wide area sites. So again, there was tech support required down there. But the rest of us, you know, it was work from home if you have the capability to work from home. And we worked out that I think we had about 205,000 VPN licenses. But even though we've got 200,000 staff, because there are third parties, vendors, consultants, various other people that need access to our systems, we needed more. So we had to quickly buy a load more. We've got 16,000 wealth managers in the US that work from home or on the road. They all got bought Chromebooks, which thankfully aren't that expensive, but you know, we still had to buy 16,000 of these things and deploy them and get them to people's houses and all those sort of things. A lot of our offshore sort of support services are done from 5 different sites in northern India, which eventually all closed. There were roughly 5 to 8%, I think it was, of staff that work there that just weren't going to be able to work from home for various reasons, maybe personal family reasons, may just be that there isn't any broadband, or there isn't a good enough, you know, dial-up connection in the location they live, which sadly there still is in some parts of India. So, but again, we had to then start getting equipment deployed to those sites and that sort of stuff. So all of it had to be done very quickly. You know, we had to break a lot of the rules about, you know, spreading out the spend of on technology across the year. It all got spent very quickly, and there's a few budgets that have been blown around that. But you know, that's senior managers making the right decisions and just saying, right, yeah, forget the budget. Let's just do what we need to do. But
yeah, and I think that's a really a good point. Just get it fixed and make sure that we plug the gap. And I'll come to you in a second, John. But it's then, and I will come on to this as a question in a moment. So how do you take those tactical fixes and align that to your longer term strategy? Because everything has changed completely. We're no longer, your strategy may have been, well, let's cloud first strategy, let's move the workloads to Azure, AWS, let's do a little bit of working from home. But now that's the new normal. People are expecting this is going to continue because not many people are going to want to commute into a major city and the cost of doing so. Sorry, John, you had a...
Yeah, so I think you're teasing at the question here, but I don't think you've actually asked it directly. So if we look at where we are in the evolution of the last 12 months or so, going into this, you know, home working was a privilege for a select group, you know, a few developers, few testers in IT, a few salespeople and road warriors as they were traditionally known. Now we've landed at a situation where, I don't know, 95% of the working population who were office-based are now home-based. And the question in my head is, so what will happen, not so much in 2021, but 22 and beyond, as we enter the new norm? Will it be, I don't know, 20% of time in office, 80% home and or mobile, or something else? Particularly for organizations like Bank of America. I mean, I work in financial services, so I'm really interested to hear, you know, where others are trending towards expectation-wise. Going into this, you know, if I go back to my colleagues in the development areas, they were commenting, you know, we were implementing Agile, we were going full Scrum, all that wonderful stuff. And the standing position was, we have to be face-to-face. We have to be able to communicate directly with no barriers or latency and all those other desires. Funny enough, as we've gone through the last 6 months, they've had to find ways around the problems, and we haven't seen any detriment. But for others, I'd really like to understand where you're going and what your expectations are.
Yeah, and Tracy, I'm conscious we've been to most other people in the group. Do you perhaps have a view on what John's just asked, and perhaps on the wider question that we've just covered?
Well, I can't answer John's question directly because I'm not in financial services, so my experience is very different. I'm okay if you want to follow up on John's before you come back to me.
No, well, you know, and I think, John, you raised a good point in the fact that it has always been seen as a privilege. I know people that have had to fill in a form just to be able to work at home. And part of the challenges of working at home is the dog. And forgive me if you can hear scratching at the door. That is a typical example of working at home. So forgive me if you hear that. Anyway, but I think now people have this expectation. I've done it now for 6 months. I've done it for 8 months. I don't want to have to fill out a form and justify it working from home. So you're going to have to change your strategy. I still want that bit of banter by the coffee machine, but as a result, unless organisations make the change to support remote working, then organisations could be left behind, and you could find some of your key workers think, well, actually, I've had enough of this. I can go to another organisation that can give me what I want and the flexibility around home and work-life balance. But Tracy, from your side, from a food manufacturing perspective, what's been the challenges from your side?
I mean, there's similar challenges for the office space that everyone else is having. I think from what people may not realize is actually making sandwiches, which is 70% of what we do, is very manually intensive. It's a conveyor belt with people stocked on both sides, physically putting, ingredients into sandwiches and flipping the bread over. So, obviously we've had to adapt, a little bit to that with social distancing. The speed of our lines and the capacity of our lines is significantly reduced. and some of those social distancing, may be with us for quite some time, well beyond, a vaccine or whatever. So we've got to start to think about how we deal with that. And what we're looking at is contactless factory, because not only, we were looking at automation and robotics to try to move some of that into outside of the human element because of the cost of labor and the accessibility of labor post-Brexit and things. But the bigger challenge for us is the ecosystem that evolves around them. So people that are not in offices, they're in the factory or in factory offices that do work around it. And the fact that a lot of those processes are not digitized at all. So, so actually being able to do those remotely has been a challenge. And then, of course, we've also had the challenge, particularly because we're a large manufacturer, is for people like Public Health England, if you do have an outbreak or a suspicion, there is a lot of information, a lot of data that you have to collate about where people are. And the more precise that you can be, if you can imagine, some of our campuses have many different halls with, 12 to 18 lines of production running in these halls. If I can't precisely identify where an individual was, either, which hall is sometimes even a challenge, which line, which part of the hall, that means that if there is an outbreak, I have to then self-isolate an entire manufacturing plant versus trying to limit the impact to something else. So I think slightly different than financial services, but it's been a challenge for us. And I think it's woken people up to how important having data digitized and having it accurate. So even our employee records, which of course are sitting in systems, but in multiple systems, you've got time and attendance systems and access control systems and HR systems. None of those were easy to bring together to try to get a full picture of who's been where and try to track all this other information that we had during issues.
Yeah, and that's a good point about digitizing these things, and that could lead on to a much wider conversation about the fragmentation of data with multi-cloud strategies and how you're backing data up, but we won't even go there right now. But what I want to do is sort of link it in with another question, just to move on the conversation somewhat, because we've heard different views from lots of different verticals. So as part of the COVID plan, most organisations have an IT strategy for the next 3 to 5 years. What I'd be interested to know is, as part of the pandemic, and we know working from home has worked well, so aside from that, what has changed in your IT strategy? What did you do and implement as a short-term strategy, short-term fix, and how are you going to translate that into a longer-term strategy? And following from that, what's worked, what's not worked, and where do you see the direction of your IT strategy post-pandemic? So there's a lot of parts there, so you don't have to answer it all, but perhaps someone would like to pick up on that question, and I'll if there's silence, I'll ask someone to jump in. John, thank you.
So I left Royal in June, but the strategy that was laid out at that point in time was fairly straightforward in terms of essentially simplification and consolidation of the organisation. So Royal was a business that had been built up over 6+ years in terms of the last splurge of acquisitions, etc. But the mergers of those businesses were at best haphazard. And therefore, if you think of it as 5 major business units or divisions, the shop floor strategy, if you like, was to simplify that down into 2 businesses. One basically managing the as-is customer base, and the other business unit or division focusing on customer acquisition. So accumulation and decumulation as the 2 labels that we used. The system landscape was also in the process of being consolidated. So my division, when I inherited it, had 16 plus major core systems, as they were described, plus a universe of 300 plus around those. And those systems were 30 plus years of age, no reliable documentation. Many of the developers who were managing them had either retired and or passed away. So therefore, in terms of going back and unpicking what was in those, it was a nightmare. On leaving, we've got that down to 2 core systems in that division, servicing 7 million customers, and therefore the cost to run, the knowledge base that's required, the skills and competencies are radically simplified and consolidated, and support future acquisitions into the business. And those acquisitions will not move in on their own system, but will move in on their own system and then rapidly be migrated onto the simplified core and simplified targets. And I suspect that's where, based on the conversations I've had in terms of finding my next role, that is a common thread that's emerging through all of those conversations. Radical simplification, radical consolidation, with an aim of reducing cost. The other point I'll tug at is the one of cloud versus on-prem. Businesses are, in the conversation that I've had, one of the reasons for doing that beyond simplification and consolidation is moving away from capital-intensive purchase to an operational expenditure-based model, cloud-based platform as service, whether it's a major administration system or an SAP platform or an Oracle platform, are now supplied as a service, and therefore there's no huge peak at the beginning in terms of purchase and acquisition. There is around implementation, but that's acceptable as long as we don't have frequent peaks associated with re-implementation. So the last piece is really around how do we ensure that those platform services and cloud-based services are maintained as out of the box or near out of the box, so the cost of upgrades and cost of maintenance is under control, for want of a better description. So hope that's helpful.
That's really helpful, actually, and it won't come as a surprise to you. As a managed service provider, we're seeing people come to Iomart because they want to move away from a CapEx model to an OpEx model. They want to, when people set up a brand new environment, they typically size it for the peaks and the troughs for the next 5 years. And quite often you'll see IT sat there idle, 80% of the capacity is not being used. And probably only 10% of the time, or even less than that, you're using the full capacity. So people say, well, actually, I want to be able to control my costs, as you quite rightly said, John, and that what is your baseline for what you need for business as usual operation? Put that in an OpEx model, in a cloud provider, perhaps, be that private or public cloud, and then scale up as you grow your business, so you're not wasting unnecessary resources. But it's interesting that you say about simple and consolidation to support the merger and acquisitions, because if you're an M&A hungry organisation, trying to integrate those organisations is key to success. I was speaking to an IT director of a big book company, many stores throughout the UK, and he said the same thing to me yesterday. We're trying to keep it simple and secure. Garrett, we've just had Nicholas just join. If you'd be kind enough to do a quick introduction, and then I'll pass the baton for somebody else to pick up on their views in a moment.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, yes.
All right. Yeah, my name is Nikolaos Timianis, and I'm the CISO at Care Associates. And I think you are now talking about data centers and so on. Our data center is based on the cloud. So I mean, we don't really have any data centers in house. And generally, what we're doing is we're trying to keep our cloud, our cloud systems updated and everything else. And also, we're trying to cover most of the vulnerabilities that we have on that system that we're using at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. No, it's so yeah. You're totally in one of the hyperscalers, one presume, or when you say cloud, you may be with another managed service provider. It's interesting to hear. And Gareth, good to see your video. I don't know how much of this you picked up, but I'd be interested to hear your views on what's worked well, how your IT strategy has changed, and what it's going to look like differently post-COVID.
So a quick thumbnail of who I am. So I'm the commercial director within a startup within SME called the Common Framework. We're doing all our R&D and all our development within Azure to deliver a governance and compliance portal. We're a virtual team, so we work around the UK. So in a sense, ironically, it's become slightly easier to work when everybody's assumption is you're going to do a Teams call, because you don't have to think about meeting up anywhere or working out what the M25 is like at the moment. So from that perspective, as an organisation, not much has changed. But we work in the public sector a great deal, do a lot with local government and NHS, and that has changed out of all recognition, quite obviously. And I mean, 4 months ago, I was talking to one of the local councils in my region who was saying, 75% of our workforce are never going back to the office. It's just not going to happen. So they're looking at massive rationalisation programs on their physical property, how they can change the delivery mechanism for their IT, and also trying to address some of the changes in the SLAs they need to look at, where a couple of people working at home 1 day a week, you don't need to worry too much. Now you've got several thousand people working at home permanently. The whole methodology, the whole psychological approach, that everything has changed. And they're looking at it from an HR perspective as well as an IT perspective as to how they can support their end users. And we work in the governance and compliance piece of that to make sure that they can work and that they're not breaking any legal or regulatory obligations.
No, that's interesting to hear. And one of the things you said there was about public sector. And I think the government in 2013, for those in the public sector, there was a big shift from the government to say cloud first should be your strategy where possible. And I'm seeing more and more government departments come into like Iomart to manage their Azure, AWS, their private, well, not so much private cloud, but there's definitely a move towards some of the public hyperscalers. Alex, it'd be interesting to get your view on how you see things changing, and then perhaps Richard, if I may, afterwards, and then perhaps down to sorry, this is in order of the screen, how we're stacked up, and then Tracy, if I may.
Yeah, sure. So I suppose it's a focus on a kind of infrastructure perspective. I think from a strategy side, we always said we were going to be a hybrid cloud model, and there was inevitable there was just services that always needed to remain on premise. I think ambitiously we said we'd be multi-cloud tenanted, but we're rethinking that right now in terms of that kind of vision as such. When I first joined LSP, it was about 3.5 years ago, and what it was is they were in a private cloud environment at the time, which was effectively, I think, the tail end of an agreement that they've been going through for about 5 years, and it unfortunately didn't quite set up. I think it set off a lot of aspirations in terms of the journey they were on, and they made a significant investment, but ultimately under-delivered. And I don't know whether that was actually anything to do with the solution. It may have been actually just a procurement cycle that they were undertaking at the time. It was very much a very good solution, but still a bare metal solution with no frills, just a costing, always picking it up and lifting ship from one location to another. and subsequently took up almost all of the OPEX spend in terms of managing that side of things. In terms of the public cloud era, it was coming on board, and we knew that it was, the other cloud, the big three kind of giants knocking on the door trying to entice us in. But it was inevitable before what it couldn't be was very much just a lift and shift approach to doing so. We did one of these, we call it cloud readiness assessment, and I know there's a number of different vendors that offer that in terms of a snapshot view of your estate and giving you as accurate as they can a forecast approach to what public cloud would entail and what it would cost, as well as also trying to understand and tiering of your key software and applications in the event of things go pop. What order do you bring them back up in? On the back of that, we did a 3-month piece of work, and that was kind of, I suppose, in terms of also a layer of due diligence in terms of understanding what our next steps were. And what I can say in that is 2 sides to it. Is if you do a cloud readiness assessment, you probably want to make sure how long you run the sniffing tools on your estate for, because we're seasonal, we fluctuate. 9 times out of 10, you'll get the same results, which will say 20% of your estate is ready, fit for cloud. 60% is a cloud candidate, but probably needs some more investigation, and the other 20% needs to remain on-prem. And what that will basically says is your dev and pre-prod environments, you can put them over into cloud because you can turn them on and off. 60% we don't have a clue, and 20% is operational there. So it was quite an interesting piece of work on that front. And I think to get a true understanding of what we were doing in cloud, we needed to run our the assessment for far longer. Now the other side of it is in terms of getting a business logic approach in terms of a business view of what your estate is in terms of priority. Just be mindful of what you ask, because I think when we got some of the results back on that, it was made me chuckle a little bit, but probably not ideal, was if we learned if all things go pop, and one of the key systems that the university staff said was important was the catering, so they can make teas and coffees. So it was an interesting piece of work, but nonetheless, what we have done actually is we did end up moving out of the environment we had. What we wanted to do is still be transformational, so we actually purchased hyper-converged technology so that we knew would play nicely with public cloud. And actually, I'm glad we did, because as I said, we needed significant housekeeping on our own estate. And actually, it was much of a culture shift for our infrastructure team as well. And hyper-converged runs much in the same as public cloud in terms of optimization and the way that you utilize it. And what we had initially was actually our engineers were given a very good kind of, although they were part of the DC migration, handed over to the most futuristic kit there is, but automatically started running it back in the same way they'd always done with VMware. And it was really quite painful in some ways. I think if we'd gone straight to public cloud, I probably wouldn't be here now. But we are on that. It's a cloud adoption framework in hearts and minds. And I think what John said, really, it's trying to move away. The capital's diminished. It's trying to get the financial accountants to understand subscription and consumption-based models, but really being pretty clear. It's got your signature on the end of it at the end of the day in terms of being understanding what it's going to cost and controlling the governance over your own team in some respects.
Well, controlling. That's an interesting point. Another topic altogether: shadow IT and spend. And Richard, no doubt, at Bank of America, you've probably got people with credit cards being able to spin up multiple environments. Okay, you've got the control under it, which is fantastic.
Yeah. We're very, very cautious about that sort of stuff. And even if you've got the IT budget getting stuff, we've got all these things called permits. You can't do anything without a permit. You need a permit to go live with a new system, a permit to send data out of the bank, that sort of stuff. Very, very cautious, and the reason is mostly because the regulators have given us such a hard time about it over the years. And we've been very cautious about our use of cloud. At the moment, we don't send any of our own data directly to any public cloud. We've got a few applications with sort of internal hosted private clouds. One of them being our sort of general ledger, which migrated a year or two. And the reason we've done that is simply it's so difficult for us to actually go to the public cloud with some data sets. It's just the hoops we have to jump through with the regulators and the amount of scrutiny we get from them. It just became too difficult and we gave up. So we will eventually look to go to a public cloud. We're working with IBM to try and build, not just us, but a general financial services cloud. And then we'll go through the process of picking which applications to take. The first ones we'll be moving to the cloud will be US-based applications, and then we'll tackle some of the more tricky regulatory requirements of some of our sort of EMEA applications, that sort of stuff. So we will get there, but probably a lot slower than most other organizations.
No, and that's fair enough. I've worked with, over the years, a number of trading and risk systems for some of the big banks like ABN AMRO, JP Morgan. They have a cloud adoption policy, but on a private cloud, as opposed to the hyperscaler, simply because of the governance and the risks around it.
Yeah.
And I always think of the public cloud is, if I go to a restaurant, and it's not that I go to a Michelin star restaurant these days, and not that I did before the pandemic, but I expect a fantastic meal for the money that you pay, because they use all the best ingredients and they've got the best cooks. I can go to Azure, AWS, Google. They've got all the best. They've got some fantastic ingredients, but I'm not the chef that, you may not be the chef that can pull it all together to give you that excellent meal experience. So doing it yourself is sometimes a challenge, and that's why you find organizations will come to the likes of Iomart. We are the chefs that put it all together and give you that great experience. But when you do a cloud readiness assessment, Alex, you're just getting a view at that moment in time, and it doesn't necessarily deal with the peaks and demands of a long-term RV tools output, if that's one of the things that you're using, live optics. Okay, I'm conscious that we've probably got about 5 minutes left. I hope this has been an interesting, thought-provoking session. Has anyone else got any comments that they'd like to add in the next 5 minutes before we sort of start to wrap up? I've got loads more questions, but we simply don't have the time.
The only thing I'd say is one of the things is we're trying to do just at the moment, and more for, I suppose, again, student focus, but equally, I suppose it applies to staff as well, is really is actually learning from the systems that we've implemented over the past few months and the interaction. What we're trying to do is assess the engagement and actually try and get some analytical reports from a multitude of different softwares at the moment. It can be Zoom, it can be Teams, it can be WebEx, it can be Panopto, which we use for lecture capture, and trying to get that and actually trying to learn from how people are interacting in it and the differences from it. And I don't know, I'm not sure, there are some reporting elements to some of the tool sets, but it's something really to actually say, well, what we learned over the past few months, let's assess it, and then that might steer some of the direction that comes next. I really don't know. We kind of just got on with it, but it's, one thing I know is, it's certainly, I don't miss the London commute as much as I did, despite still living in London, but it's certainly, it's quite exhausting. It's longer days, you're certainly online a lot more. In terms of attention, productive wise, I think you are, because you're so reactive. When I do go into the office, it's bizarre, as we say, because when I was out of office, I put an out of office on, but now I'm actually I'm in the office on, because I'm less I can't be as reactive as I am when I'm in front of the computer, and I feel awful because people are messaging you on the train, or if you're actually at your desk, it's you feel you're not as responsive like that, and that's the expectation now. That you almost have to apologise. I'm actually in the office. I might actually have to talk to someone face to face and not be sat there kind of hammering out emails and being lightning quick as it is. And I guess it's a learning process.
Yeah, definitely. But one of the things that lots of organisations, and you've touched on it with the analytics and learning how you can improve. I had an interesting story. I met data protection officer at Her Majesty Prisons. And the way that they're using data to improve. They've done some statistics based on what's happening in the prison, what prisoners are offending in there that are attacking other prisoners, those that are reoffending when they've come out. And part of the analytics is, well, what training have we given these people? What prison officers have we had on at that time? If we put on more prison officers, would that cut down the amount of offending taking place? And it's really a powerful thing, the analytics of it, and that's part of a cloud transformation is something that Iomart are very much at the forefront of as part of the transformation journey. So if that, and I'll be interested to talk to you more about it as part of the overall strategy, IT transformation strategy. But I think we've got 4 minutes left. Is there anything that you guys would like to add? I don't want to open necessarily a new topic altogether, because we're certainly not going to have the time. But is there any quick wins perhaps that people could chuck in that think actually there's a takeaway that would work for us as part of a future IT strategy that we haven't necessarily thought of? Anything that's going to get us thinking and get that grey matter working over the weekend? Perhaps that's too much of an open question.
That's a tough question for the end, Paul.
It is. But I think perhaps we've got 3 minutes left, so I guess really now's the opportunity just to thank everybody for your input. I hope it's been a useful session. It certainly wasn't ever intended to be a session to sell to you. It was just to get you talking and to learn about each other's experiences. That said, of course, at Iomart, we're a managed service provider. We'd be delighted to help you in any way, shape or form, whether that's for your data analytics, data protection, private cloud, public cloud consumption journey. Please do get in contact because we'd be delighted to help. Of course we would be. So I think the details of everyone that's attended this call today will be circulated post-call by Craig and his team. If you do think of anything, then please do get in contact. I hope you found it useful. It's been an absolute pleasure hearing all your different stories. It's and there's definitely a common theme there. That's for sure.
Yeah, but Paul, I was just thinking there's been a few sort of key subjects that have come up, and hopefully between you and Andrew, it might be good to sort of think about those and try and maybe put something together that we can send out to everybody, because I think there's been some good discussions sort of in the room today. So that'd be nice as a follow up.
We can do that. Yeah.
Paul, thank you to you. I think you moderated really well and got everyone involved in the conversation. My comment of the session is I now putting in the office message on, so thank you, Alex, for that one. I'll come up with a session like that for the next event that we run. So I enjoyed that comment. Thank you to everybody. Have a great sort of weekend. Stay safe, everybody, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Brilliant. Nice to meet everybody. See you all soon.
Bye.